This is the story of the coming of life. So do you remember when I told you guys the other week the story of the creation of the universe? We in the Montessori world like to call that the great story because it is a great story. It's so many fun experiments, so many cool things to imagine, the charts. Anyways, today I'm going to tell you about the story of coming of life and how the plants, the animals, and us, the human beings, arrived on Earth. So I want you to go back in your minds to when the Earth was born, and it was a tiny little drop of light and heat, commotion and confusion. And yet, in that tiny drop, every particle was given a set of laws to follow. So when the Earth cooled down, everything settled. The heavier things to the middle, and the lighter things on the outside. And the cloud that had surrounded the Earth, filled with ash from all the volcanic eruptions, began to clear so the sun could now shine again upon the beautiful pearl that the Earth was. But one day, after all that initial commotion and confusion, something was not quite right. The sun was looking down at the Earth and began to see something was happening. There was trouble. It was raining a lot on Earth, and the water passed through the air, and so it mixed up with all these gases, bringing it into the oceans and washing away some of the salts from the rocks. And it was all these storms that were breaking up the rocks, and the seas were becoming fuller and fuller, and the land was being washed away. It looked as though the order that was once going on the beautiful Earth was disrupted. And the sun was wondering, who is causing this? So the sun looked to the water, and the water said, "Oh, who, me? You think I'm the cause of this? What have I done as water? All I do is follow the laws that I was given. When I become hot, I evaporate and disappear. When I cool down, I fall down. And being a liquid, I have to go down and into the cracks. So what am I supposed to do? I'm following all my laws. I think you should look to the air. It's the air's fault that all this is happening." Air said, though, "What, me? You're gonna blame me? No way! I'm doing a very important job of covering all the Earth with layers and layers of blankets, so the Earth won't get cold. Now, the Earth has cold head and some cold feet too, so I always have to be on the run to warm her up with my blankets. And what does the water do? The silly thing jumps on my back and goes on a ride. It's okay when it's flat, but when the rocks make their big mountains and hills, she just gets so heavy I have to drop her. I can't play with the water. I have serious work to do as air. If you ask me, the rocks are the ones who are causing all this. They're all full of wrinkles and bubbles. They have no consideration at all. They don't even move an inch to let me pass. And sometimes those rocks are freezing cold, and when I pass next to them, I have to cringe. And sometimes they're so hot, I have to climb up to avoid even touching them. But then the rocks, they heard that the air was trying to blame them. And they said, "Blame us, will you? But we're not doing anything but just sitting around. It's not our fault that we get hot. Do you think we want to get hot? No. But when the sun shines upon us, we cannot help it. We get hot. What can we do? It's how we're made. If you ask me, sun, this is your fault. You are to blame." And so it went on. The elements were all arguing. Of course, each one of them was right in their own way. Everyone was behaving the way that they had just been made. And yet, order on Earth was being threatened, and something had to be done. And what could be done? So then, the great creator said something else. I'm going to give you the great creator said, something no one else has. I'm going to give you a tiny drop of jelly. And this tiny drop of jelly has sensitivity. And in order to exist, you must eat and grow. But all of you will not eat the same thing, and you will also have the power to create more of yourselves. This is your specialty. So then, life came in the form of a tiny little drop of jelly, each that had laws to follow. Eat, grow, and create more like yourself. These were tiny little machines that would just multiply by splitting up. It was like as if you had a car and suddenly that car split up into two slightly smaller cars. And then the cars would grow and grow, and then each of those would split into two slightly smaller cars. So you'd be up to 4. And then you'd keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. More and more and more of these tiny drops of jelly began to fill the seas, and they did the important work of cleaning up the oceans and the seas from the salts that were being washed away into the oceans. Now, when they fed upon these salts, some of them found the water to be itchy and just they didn't like it, so they built a protective shell surrounding themselves. And when these tiny drops of jelly with their shells would die, they would drift down to the bottom of the seas, and they'd create a layer across the bottom of the ocean. And as time passed, more of these creatures multiplied, they lived, they ate, they grew, and they made more of themselves, and they would die. And so layer upon layer began to form along the bottom of the ocean. And so some of these pages remain for us to be able to look back upon and read, creating the book of the earth. These first tiny creatures were made up of just one cell that did all the work: breathe, eat, and get rid of what they didn't want, and drift around the seas, cleaning up the water. But as time went on, some of them seemed to have said, why not join together? Let's do this work together. We could be much more efficient. So along came slightly bigger creatures made out of several cells. They too went on eating and making more of themselves. And they would tell the different cells as a part of their being, like, you do the eating, you do the breathing, you do the multiplying, you're in charge of moving us around. And so became the creatures with arms and legs, mouths and hearts, creatures with organs. And so it came to be that as you look upon the pages of the earth, we can see these different types of creatures already existing there. And let me show you.